In this video, I want to show you some of the ways that you can get a little wild and crazy and creative in Lightroom. We tend to think of Lightroom as being sort of the straight man of the photo software world. Lightroom is where we do spot removal and correct the color balance and change our tonal range a little bit and that kind of thing. But it can be pretty fun and wild. You can get into some pretty crazy effects. Now, it's not Photoshop. You can't do layers and blending modes and composites and all the wonderful kind of heavy lifting crazy things you can do in Photoshop. And I do hope you'll come back next semester and join in the fun of learning all about Photoshop. But there still are quite a lot of fun possibilities. Your assignment this week is to get a little crazy with Lightroom, either using the tools that I'm going to show you now or some of your own or a combination. You can pile them all on together and hopefully this will give you some inspiration and ideas. Okay, so I'm going to work on this photograph that I took in Ireland of a stone circle, and I've already developed it, done the basic sort of corrective developing, changed the exposure, brought down the highlights, just add a little clarity so it's where I like it. But now we're going to get a little bit wild. I'm going to start with a graduated filter, and I want to show you as I go along, I'm going to show you some features of these areas that you may not have seen before. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down over the sky, drop it right on the horizon. I'm going to tilt it a little bit. And by the way, I always find this graduated filter a little squirrely when I do that. It's behaving itself tonight. Now I want to show you a cool feature that we're going to play with, just so I can play just with the sky, because what I really want to do is just make the sky kind of crazy. I want to leave this stuff alone. And so I'm going to go down to the range mask, and I'm going to pick color, and I'm going to grab this little eyedropper, and all I'm going to be doing is just telling Lightroom which colors I want it to adjust. And I'm just going to click a little bit along here, so I'm grabbing just stuff in the sky, and I'm going to leave the colors in the foreground out. And you'll see that as I make adjustments, instead of affecting those stones, it's just affecting the sky because I picked only those colors. Pretty cool tool. Okay, so we can drop that exposure down. That makes it more dramatic, but let's start doing some sort of crazier stuff with the color. I want to play, let's see, ooh, that's kind of wild. That's kind of ordinary. I want to go all the way to that yellow, bring the exposure down again, maybe add some magenta. Yeah, that's looking kind of wild. Now I'm going to drop the shadows down, make that a little bit darker, and I'm going to dehaze it. There we go. Clarity. Just make it a little bit more menacing. I can go all the way. This is your chance. If you've been afraid to go all the way with some of these tools, this is your chance to try it. I'm going to up the saturation, and then this tool is really cool. I can actually just shift the hue over. So I'm going to pick a pretty crazy color, not the green. I think I want the purple. Yeah. And that, I think, is pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to click done. I like that part. The next thing I want to do is just to play with the foreground. Let's actually, since we did all that crazy stuff there, we can grab another graduated filter. And let's this time go from the bottom up. See that this is actually, I picked another tool. There we go. And I'm going to do the range mask again. And I'm going to do color again. And this time I'm just going to pick these greens and the browns, all of that stuff. So that mostly it's just going to pick the foreground. And let's just go ahead and play. Oh yeah, that's wild. We'll do that. We'll do that. Bring it all the way over there. I am going to go crazy with my clarity, bring it all the way over to the right. That looks fun. A little bit of texture and some saturation. And you can see that we are making this a little bit trippy. Now I can also, whoops, don't want to do that. I'm going to put this back. Let's Let's go back one area. There we go. And I am going to just try pushing this up, and you see how it sort of grabs those colors as we move up, so I can add more. Whoop! Now, I don't know what happened. There we go. I went to the opposite just for a second. Now it's back. It was just doing a little funny thing. Okay, and then click done. That is a pretty wild version of Stonehenge. Okay, or of not Stonehenge, but something very much smaller, but a stone circle in Ireland. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back because I want to show you a couple of other features, one particular thing that you can do. And I don't want to pile them all on top of each other because it gets a little nutty. So the first thing I want to do is show you how you can actually do a selective black and white if you'd like to do that. And it is possible in Lightroom. And all I need to do is grab the brush tool. Now, I always, when I have the brush tool on, I always have the auto mask, and you'll see why this is really handy when I do this. I am going to show the mask overlay. So this auto mask means that when you paint it on, and remember this red is just to show you where you are, the auto mask will look for edges, and as long as you're careful and you keep the little plus sign inside of the area that you're selecting, it is going to just select to the edge. Now, this really depends on whether or not there are strong edges, so it's not going to be perfect. You have to be the person you have to be the brains behind the operation. You know, you'll learn what Lightroom is good at and what it's not so good at, and so that you can make corrections. But I'm going to just select all of these, and you'll see the method behind my madness in a second. Remember, the overlay is just a way of marking where we're going to make changes. It's not actually going to show up in the end. I'm going to erase right down here, and I'm going to take the overlay off, and I'm just going to desaturate. And you can see that wherever it was that we had that overlay, it has desaturated it. Now we've got little bits of color in here, and that's because when I went in with the brush, and we'll go back with that same brush, when I went in with the brush, make sure we're desaturated again, there we go. We didn't have it absolutely 100% opaque, so we can just keep going back and picking those things out, making sure that auto mask is on, and we can make that more and more black and white and just leave those very black and white in the midst of that. You could do the opposite. You could leave the stones colored, but this is kind of a fun way to play. And once you're in that mode, we'll go out of this brush. You can play then with the vibrance and the saturation of the other areas, or even change the color, and those rocks, any place where you have desaturated them, are not going to be as affected. So that's another fun way to play. Mostly these are with color. I am going to show you some little manipulations you can do in a minute as well. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning because I want to show you one more. Now, like I said, you're very welcome to lay all of these effects one on top of the other, but go ahead and try it. I found for demos it gets a little crazy, and I want you to be able to see what these individual things do. But when you go to play with this, do whatever the heck you're into. Okay, here's an area we haven't been in. This is the tone curve, and this is, by the way, a wonderful tool for doing precise corrections on tonal areas. So I can actually go in and just grab different areas and change very subtly using this tone curve, or not so subtly. I can change the areas in the tonal range. Okay, but what I want to do, let's just go back, is I want to show you how you can separate this out into different colors. I mean, even if you just play with this, you can start to have some kind of dramatic effects. By the way, as I'm doing this, I'm going to point out that these are the highlights, these are the midtones, and these are the shadows. So what you're really doing is you're kind of messing with the histogram. not just making it darker or lighter, but messing with its whole relationship. Okay, and I want to go ahead and come back to the original curve. There we go. Oops, one more. Nope. All right, I'll cut back that way. It's easier. Okay, so what I also want to show you is that you can actually play with the individual colors. Now this is interesting, so I'm going to pick red. Now notice that this is red, green, and blue, which are actually the primary colors in photography, and we're going to get into that a little bit later in the semester. So if we're on red, we are actually on using the complementary colors of red and cyan. So you can see that we've got a little shading to show us. If we go this way, we're pulling the red up. If we go this way, we're going towards cyan, which is the opposite. So I'm taking the highlights towards cyan, the shadows towards red. And you can see this can get super, super fun and playful. I can also do the same thing with green and magenta, and I'm putting one on top of the other. The more extreme you get, the weirder it gets. Same thing with blue and yellow. So you can really start to tweak your colors in some pretty crazy ways. Things get very wild. Okay, on top of that, once you go, and I'm just going to go back a few, let's go back to there. Once you do that, you can go back and play with your highlights, your exposure, your whites. You can still play with all of these things. You can bring your clarity down, make it kind of mushy, bring your haze down, which makes it super hazy. And you can even go in and do a graduated or a radial filter. Okay, super fun when we're in tone curves. Let's go ahead and go back to our original. Oh, it looks so boring now, doesn't it? You can play with your HSL panel. We've already been there. You can check out, by the way, I don't usually show these a lot, but you can check out the presets. I prefer to make my own, but you can go ahead and look through some of these. These are sort of ordinary ones, but there's also some creative presets. And you can start with one of these presets and go from there. These are just, and once you pick them, you'll see that they're actually picking specific sets. You can also, there's some fun different black and white ones. Remember that once you go to black and white, you can't add color to it. So there's other things you can play with there. Let's go ahead and go down to transform. So I want to show you some kind of kooky stuff you can do here. This is actually, all of these are correctional tools, and we're just being very extreme to see what can happen. So the transform tool allows you, this is usually used for architecture, it allows you to make corrections, but it also can end up being kind of fun if you just want to, for instance, make this a little bit wild. And I'm going to go ahead and bring the scale down, and I'm going to offset it from the top. Whoop, there we go. Whoop, it's a little bit squirrely. There we go. Bring it down. There we go. And you can see it's really kind of a fun, crazy transformation. You can actually twist it, change the aspect, you can rotate it, you can move it horizontally or vertically. And anytime you want to include the whole picture, you can just change the scale. So you can end up with a rather entertaining little diamond-shaped scene with those distortions. This is really the only way that you can actually distort and manipulate an image's aspect ratio or size in here in Lightroom. Otherwise, you need to go to Photoshop, but this can be awfully fun. Okay, we've checked out effects. You know about the vignetting, which you can play with in combination of this. You can also play with your grain. And remember that grain can be super, super wild. So we can start to make this a pretty wild and different and very, I would say, unrealistic interpretation of the scene. Okay, I'm going to leave you there. That should be enough for you to get started with. Feel free to go into other areas and see what happens, and have fun.